And then from Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 20. Finally, be strong in God and take strength of God's power. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For our struggle is not with enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, so that you may be able to withstand on that evil day, and having done everything, to stand firm. Stand therefore and fasten the belt of truth around your waist, and put on the breastplate of righteousness. As shoes for your feet, put on whatever will make you ready to proclaim the gospel of the peace. With all those, take the shield of faith, which you will be able to quench all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Pray in the Spirit at all times in every prayer and supplication. To that end, keep alert and always persevere in the supplication for all the saints. Pray also for me, that when I speak, a message may be given to me to make known with boldness the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains. Pray that I may declare it boldly, as I must speak. A few years ago, if you went to the Christian bookstore, you would find a spot of toys, and I think they're still there, that kids can buy, showing them, Sunday school lessons, and primarily it was for the Sunday school teachers to take home and supposedly use in their classes. And one of the fun ones was the armor of God, and little boys would buy the armor of God and they dressed up as soldiers. And we sang a militant hymn a minute ago. I'm going to sing a couple more before the end of the service. And we say, oh, we're going to go attack people. And unfortunately, that's where many churches have ended up today. Going out to attack people. That's not what this passage is about. If we think we're supposed to go out and attack people, we missed what's happening. Because this passage is about learning to defend yourself. Learning to defend yourself the way the early church did. The early church was universally pacifist. It wasn't until the conversion of Constantine that any significant portion of the church became believers in military rule. And eventually we would take the concept of just war into our philosophy. And so as we read this passage, we need to understand that they thought, what sort of defense can I possibly have against somebody who might throw me to the lions? Somebody who might cut off my head, put me on a cross, burn me alive. I should put on some sort of armor. What is my defense? And some of the early church probably said the only thing we could possibly do is pick up swords and keep our enemies away at bay. The Apostle Paul makes very specific reference to that here. He says, I am in chains for my stance in the gospel. I am being taken to court. And he has seen around him guards. He has seen around him soldiers whose job is to keep him in place. And so that imagery comes right to his mind as he writes to Ephesians and hears about their troubles. And he says, don't do it part way. Don't do it part way and think this little bit here will protect me, and you don't need the rest of it. He says you have to dress up like a soldier and put it all on. You put on your breastplate, you put on your belt, you pick up your shield, gird your feet. And he says, what is our defense? What is the whole armor of God? And he says, you need something to bind it all together. First thing he mentions is a belt. What is going to bind it all together? And he says, truth. I think we get mixed up about that idea, because the first century does not mean what we think of today. We think about facts, we think about misinformation, we think about what can we prove in a science lab. And then we get upset if we find out the historical facts of the Bible are not exactly the way archaeologists can prove it, not the way historians can dig into some ancient piece of paper, papyrus, and say that's the way it happened. That's not truth to them. That is not the philosophical concept of truth. That is a post-Enlightenment idea of truth. We didn't even think about that till the 17th century. That's the Enlightenment era, during the colonial period. So what is truth to the ancient world? Truth to them is that by which you can live. Truth to them is that which seems like it is the proper way to live. And what binds things together that is complete and whole. If you live in contradiction, hypocritically, to what you say, you are not living in truth. Now, in the post-Enlightenment era, it's not bad to live by the facts, to pay attention to what science says and look back at our church minutes and say, well, this is what we agreed to last year. That was the fact of what happened. But we still need to stop and say to ourselves, when are we being hypocritical? When are we not living in truth as to how our behavior fits in the world? Are we harming our neighbor? Are we failing to show love? Are we failing to live by the Spirit of God? And that's what binds this armor together. Second thing he lifts up, the breastplate of righteousness. That's the truth. Have we failed in living the truth? What is it that holds our body most defenseless? If people can look at you and say, he cheats his neighbor. He's selling the car and lying about the fact that it's got 200,000 miles on it, not 100,000 miles. What is the honest way to live? What are people going to hold you accountable for that is not considered righteous? In the early church, that was their best defense. That which is what they wanted to defend their body with. Because their enemies are going to say, this is a threat to the state. These weird people over here, this new religion that was Christianity, was a threat to everybody around them. And so they needed righteousness. They really needed righteousness to say, we're not a threat. We're the calm, peaceful people that demonstrates love, demonstrates what civilization could be about. We care for our neighbors. We give to our neighbors. We offer alms to the poor. We don't steal. That is the breastplate of righteousness. Third thing, put on shoes or whatever. I like that term whatever because it suggests to me that the Apostle Paul is just speaking off the cuff, and he probably was. It says, get ready to proclaim the gospel of peace, the good news. What is it that we have to offer as Christians that is ready for the world to hear? What is it that they desperately want to hear? When they meet a Christian, they should be absolutely thrilled to see us, because they say, that person is going to care for us, is going to love us. That person is ready to do something to make my life better. Is going to bring peace. I saw a meme this week that said, a pastor only preaches 10 minutes a week, but a Christian preaches for an entire week. I only get 10 minutes. You all are the sermon that the world sees. That is the most significant thing that the church has to offer. You are the ones that get to walk out there and say to the world, I bring peace. I bring good news. That's a thrilling task to perform. Something you should be ready to do every single second of the week. The shield of faith. We kind of miss that. Because in our modern world, we say, that's the shield of belief. I believe it. And perhaps that might sound like a subtle distinction for what I'm about to say, but faith means commitment. Semper Fi. Another military image, right? Any Marines here? Former Marines? No? Commitment. We are committed to one another. That's the same word as faith. Fide. It's not credo, I believe. It's fide. I am committed to my faith that even when the arrows of the world is aiming at me, hitting me again and again and again, I lift up my shield, I block those things that are pushing me down, and I continue forward. That's faith. When things are getting hard, you know what you're aiming for. You are aiming for the church. You are aiming for healing. You are aiming for service of Christ. You are aiming for this helmet of salvation. You are working towards peace of God. You are looking for that which will make us whole. The problem becomes the last word. The sword. the sword that is the Spirit and the Word of God. So often we use that to attack one another. A lot of times when people find out I'm a pastor, they ask me, "Are you a Bible-believing church?" And I am always so tempted to say no. I am so tempted to say no because I know that they really are not asking if we read the Bible in church. They really aren't concerned about that issue. What they are concerned about is whether or not I interpret the Bible the way they do. There's a story about a person comes up to another man sitting on the edge of a bridge ready to jump off to his death. And the man says, "Don't jump, don't jump! You have so much to live for." And the man who's ready to commit suicide says, "What do I have to live for?" And he says, "Well, are you a Christian or a Buddhist?" The suicidal person says, "Well, I'm a Christian." "Are you Catholic or Protestant?" Says, "Protestant." "Oh, good, I am too." Says, "Are you Lutheran or Baptist?" Says, "Well, I'm Baptist." "Oh, good, I am too." And he says, "Are you Reformed Baptist or General Baptist?" And the man says, "Well, I'm Reformed Baptist." "Oh, good, I am too." And he says, "Well, are you Reformation of 1879 or 1915? The man says, "Well, I'm Reformation 1915. And the man who is trying to rescue him pushes him off the bridge and says, "Heretic, should have been 1879. We can keep drawing distinctions. But if we hold the gospel, or hold the Bible higher than ourselves, we find the thing that cuts to our quick. Not to draw distinctions from one another, but to ask ourselves, what gets to our heart? That is what the Spirit of truth is about. The Spirit of the sword. We need to ask ourselves, not how do we attack those people out there, but how do we demonstrate that we are truly defended by God? And to live according to God's Spirit and be prepared to be cut by God's Spirit when we fail to live up to that standard.